If something ever happens to me, promise you won't wait. Why would anything happen? She asked, smiling. He didn't smile back. She met him on an ordinary evening, the kind that leaves no mark in memory unless something unexpected happens. The cafe was nearly empty, the rain pressed softly against the windows, and the city outside seemed tired of itself. She was sitting alone with a cup of coffee she had already forgotten to drink when he asked, politely, whether the chair across from her was free. His voice was calm, almost careful, as if he had learned long ago that drawing attention could be dangerous. She nodded, not because she felt anything special, but because saying no would have required more effort than she had that day. At first, he was nothing more than a stranger with tired eyes and a crooked smile. He spoke little, listened more, and when he laughed, it was quiet, restrained, as if laughter itself was a risk. He asked about her work, her family, her plans, and he listened in a way that made her feel seen rather than examined. She did not ask many questions in return. Something about him suggested that questions might open doors better left closed. They met again, then again. Walks replaced cafes, long conversations replaced small talk. He never spoke about his past in detail, only in fragments, places he had been, mistakes he admitted without naming, people he no longer spoke to. She told herself that everyone had shadows, that adulthood was mostly about learning to live with them. When she asked what he did for a living, he answered vaguely, and she accepted it with the same vague trust people often confuse with wisdom. Love did not arrive suddenly. It grew slowly, like a habit, like a second heartbeat. She became used to his presence, to the way he checked the street before crossing, to the way his phone never rang late at night but was always on silent. She noticed the scars on his hands and accepted his explanations without pressing further. She noticed how some people recognized him instantly and others pretended not to see him at all. The truth revealed itself not in a dramatic confession, but in a sentence spoken too casually to be planned. One evening, as they sat on the edge of her bed, he said, "If something ever happens to me, promise you won't wait." She laughed, thinking it was a joke, but his face remained serious. That was when she realized that his life was not built on the assumption of a future. When he finally told her who he really was, it was not accompanied by tears or apologies. He spoke calmly, like a man reciting facts he could not change. He had done things that could not be undone. He had crossed lines that society draws for a reason. He had survived in a world where morality was flexible and consequences were real. He did not ask for forgiveness, only for honesty. She listened. She felt fear, yes, but also something more dangerous, understanding. She saw not just the criminal, but the boy he must have been, the choices that narrowed over time until there was only one path left. She told herself that loving someone did not mean approving of everything they had done. She told herself that people were more than their worst actions. From that moment on, her life began to change in subtle ways. She stopped asking certain questions. She learned not to repeat things he said in confidence. She memorized routines, times, exits. She became careful with words, with looks, with silences. Love, she discovered, could be a form of discipline. There were moments of happiness, real ones. Mornings when the world felt normal, when they cooked breakfast and argued about nothing important. Nights when he held her as if she were the only safe place left. In those moments, she almost forgot what he was. Or perhaps she chose to forget. But fear never disappeared completely. It lived quietly in the background, like a low hum. Every knock on the door made her heart race. Every unfamiliar car parked too long outside filled her with unease. She learned how heavy waiting could be, waiting for a call, for a message, for reassurance that he was still free, still alive. People around her began to notice the change. She smiled less easily. She avoided certain topics. She drifted away from friends who asked too many questions. It was easier to live in a smaller world, one where explanations were unnecessary. Isolation came not as punishment, but as protection. He tried, in his own way, to shield her. He never involved her directly. He kept his other life separate, or so he claimed. But separation is an illusion when lives are intertwined. His danger became her danger, his enemies her invisible threats. She began to understand that loving a criminal meant accepting consequences you never agreed to. There were nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when love had turned into endurance. She asked herself whether loyalty was courage or fear disguised as virtue. She imagined leaving, packing a bag, changing her number, starting again somewhere no one knew her name. But each time, the image of his face stopped her. Not the criminal's face, but the man she loved, vulnerable in rare, unguarded moments. The arrest came suddenly, violently, without warning. Sirens cut through the night like blades. Doors were forced open. Orders were shouted. She stood frozen as they took him away, his eyes searching for hers one last time. He did not resist. He only looked at her, silently apologizing for a future he could no longer protect her from. The days that followed were hollow. Silence replaced fear, but it was not relief. It was absence. She visited him when she could, separated by glass and time limits. He tried to reassure her, told her to live, to be free, to forget him if she had to. She nodded, but inside, she knew that forgetting was not something love allowed easily. She faced judgment from all sides, from strangers, from family, from herself. Some asked why she stayed. Others assumed she must be like him to love him. Few understood that love is not always logical, and rarely clean. Over time, something shifted. Distance brought clarity. She began to see how much of herself she had given up piece by piece. How fear had shaped her choices. How silence had become her second language. Loving him had taught her compassion, but it had also taught her how easily one could disappear inside another person's life. When he was finally sentenced, she cried not only for him, but for the version of herself that believed love could fix what the world had broken. She visited one last time and told him goodbye, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with honesty. She told him she loved him, and that she was leaving. He understood. Perhaps he had always known this was the ending. She walked out of the prison into sunlight that felt unfamiliar. Freedom was frightening at first, heavier than chains. But step by step, she rebuilt a life that belonged to her again. The past did not disappear, but it no longer defined every breath she took. She had loved a criminal, and that love had changed her forever. It taught her the power of empathy and the cost of losing oneself. It taught her that love without freedom becomes a prison of its own. And though she would always carry his memory, she finally understood that some stories are not meant to be continued, only learned from, and then released. She thought the hardest part would be leaving, but she was wrong. The hardest part began after, when there was no longer anyone to blame her fear on except herself. Freedom did not feel like relief, it felt like standing in an open field after years of narrow corridors, unsure which direction was safe. Every decision, even the smallest, suddenly belonged only to her, and that responsibility weighed more than she expected. At first, she lived cautiously, as if danger might still be hiding behind ordinary days. She chose neutral streets, familiar shops, predictable routines. She avoided emotional risks the way she once avoided dark alleys. When people showed interest in her, she kept a polite distance, afraid that closeness itself might be a trap. Love, she believed, had already taken more than its share. Sometimes, in quiet moments, memories returned without warning. A gesture, a tone of voice, the smell of rain on warm pavement. She remembered the way he used to watch the world, always alert, always calculating, as if life were a game where losing meant disappearing. She wondered whether prison had finally slowed him down, whether time was teaching him what she had learned the harder way. These thoughts came uninvited, but she let them pass. She no longer tried to erase the past, she learned to coexist with it. Work became her anchor. It gave structure to days that once revolved around waiting. She discovered a quiet satisfaction in reliability, showing up, finishing tasks, being trusted for ordinary reasons. There was something healing in a life when nothing needed to be hidden. Slowly, she began to speak more openly, to laugh without checking who might be listening, to sleep through the night without waking at every imagined sound. One afternoon, she received a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. For a long time, she did not open it. The envelope sat on the table like a question she was not sure she wanted answered. When she finally read it, there were no dramatic declarations, no pleas. He wrote simply about time, about regret, about accepting responsibility. He told her he was glad she had chosen herself. He wished her a life untouched by his shadows. She cried after reading it, but the tears were different. They were not heavy with longing or guilt. They were a release, a farewell that felt complete. She did not write back. Not because she didn't care, but because some endings need silence to remain true. As months turned into years, she noticed how the story of her life began to change in her own mind. She was no longer the woman who loved a criminal. She was a woman who survived loving one. The difference mattered. It returned power to her hands, where it had always belonged. Eventually, she allowed herself to trust again, cautiously, imperfectly. Not everyone who entered her life stayed, and not every connection was easy. But she learned that healthy love does not require fear to stay alive. It does not demand silence, secrecy, or sacrifice of self. It grows in the open, where both people can breathe. Sometimes, when she told parts of her story, people listened with fascination or judgment. She no longer tried to explain herself. She had learned that understanding is a gift, not a debt. What mattered was that she understood herself. Looking back, she realized that loving him had not been a mistake, but a lesson written in painful ink. It taught her boundaries, resilience, and the courage to walk away even when love remains. It showed her that compassion must include oneself, or it becomes another form of harm. Her life did not become perfect. No life ever does. But it became honest. And in that honesty, she found peace, not the absence of scars, but the strength to live without hiding them. She had once tied her life to a criminal. Now, she had untied it, thread by thread, and woven something new. Not defined by darkness, but shaped by survival, choice, and the quiet bravery of moving forward. Years later, when her hair had begun to show the first traces of grey and her reflection felt more familiar than strange, she realized that the story no longer hurt the way it once had. It lived inside her like an old photograph, faded at the edges, still meaningful, but no longer sharp enough to wound. She could remember without trembling. She could speak his name without her voice breaking. That, she understood, was healing. Occasionally, she wondered what had become of him. Not with longing, but with a distant human concern, the kind reserved for someone who once mattered deeply. She hoped he had found a way to live with himself, the way she had learned to live with her choices. Hope, she discovered, did not require closeness. It only required letting go of bitterness. Her life unfolded quietly. There were ordinary joys, shared meals, work completed well, evenings filled with conversation rather than fear. There were disappointments too, but they came without chaos, without the constant threat of collapse. Stability, once boring to her, became precious. It was the foundation she never knew she needed. One day, she was asked to speak to a group of women who were struggling to leave destructive relationships. She hesitated at first, unsure whether her story belonged to anyone else. But when she stood before them, she did not speak of him as a villain or herself as a victim. She spoke about love that confuses pain with loyalty, about fear that disguises itself as devotion, about the slow erosion of self that can happen without a single dramatic moment. She told them that leaving does not mean love was false. It means survival chose honesty over illusion. She told them that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet decision to stop sacrificing yourself for someone who cannot meet you in the light.